welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to us by Wb40 Women Beyond 40 Magazine, changing the narrative around ageism for women beyond the age of 40. Today in the confessional, I am super pumped to have our guest, Jo Pybus. Jo calls herself a late onset feminist and a late onset writer. She actually started writing in 2019 about menopause, and she hasn't looked back since. Prior to that, she was running an IT business with her hubby while raising 3 now adult children. Jo is an incredible person. She's a brilliant advocate for women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, a brilliant writer and a regular columnist for Her Canberra, as well as writing for Wb40 Magazine. We love having her in the Wb40 crew, and I know you're just going to love her story. Welcome to the confessional, Jo Pybus. Hello and welcome to the confessional. Jo, how are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic, Sandy. Thank you so much for having me along. I'm really excited for our talk today.
I am super excited because, Jo, you've recently joined us over at Wb40 because you're fabulous, sharing your wisdom in the pages, and you'll be, in the next issue, which is so exciting.
Oh, look, it's an absolute pleasure, and I am amongst giants, so it's, the pleasure is all mine.
Oh, look, you're a bit of a giant and a bit of a legend yourself, Jo. Don't you worry about that. But what people wouldn't know is that we've never actually met in real life, face-to-face.
No.
And so it's just really nice to have these moments where we can chat. And so I'm super excited to have you here.
Well,
so thank you.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. Mutual Appreciation Society here, I assure you.
Yes, big loves and hugs. If only we could.
I know.
What I absolutely love about you is that you basically call yourself a late onset feminist, and I love that. But I wanted to chat with you more about that in the confessional today, because I really believe there's a lot of women out there who will listen to this and say, oh yeah, maybe that's me too. So how did you discover basically that you were a late onset feminist?
Yeah, well, I guess firstly, it had been simmering in the background, but the actual moniker itself, and how I've now labelled myself as this, came from a podcast called Women with Clout, hosted by Jane Caro and Christine Fox. And they had a guest on, a lovely woman called Dr. Kirsten Ferguson. And Kirsten's a well-respected consultant in the leadership space in Australia. And she talked about her earlier career being in the Royal Australian Air Force and being a cadet officer. And she actually became Dux of the Academy in her day, and then got offered the second top job for the next year because her superior officers said they weren't ready for a woman in the top role. Now, this happened to Kirsten in the mid-90s, and Jane Caro on the podcast asked her, how did you feel about that at the time? And Kirsten piped up and said, well, I felt grateful. And she realises now, of course, how bizarre that thinking was. And she described herself as a late onset feminist. And I had this profound moment of realisation that I too tried to fly under the radar of feminism, for a good part of my life, and feel quite differently now. And it also, I guess, got me thinking I'm really late onset to many of the things that I've achieved in life. And so I also call myself the late onset athlete and the late onset writer. And I love it because I guess my mantra now is it really is better late than never. And God knows what I'm going to be doing when I'm 70. Hold that space.
Well, I for one am grateful that you've joined us here in this space, because you just bring so much joy to your writing, and passion and anger and annoyance and all of the things that come with, sadly, this territory of ageism and sexism that we are surrounded by. But I was just mentioned to you prior to us recording this that I loved seeing you on SBS you were on SBS talking about menopause, you know, the big M. And so how did that feel to be invited to come on and speak on this panel, surrounded by brilliant women like Kate Murphy and etc.? And so how did it feel?
Oh, look, it was absolutely surreal. And it came about because I'd written an article. In fact, it was the first article I'd ever written, and it got accepted into the lovely media website here in Canberra called Her Canberra, who I'm now a columnist for and have been for 2 years. And the very first article I wrote was called Perimenopause, Buckle Up Girls, because it was at a time where, after years of suffering all sorts of bizarre things, which every woman of our age would recognise, I didn't recognise it at the time, and then I had to do, you know, sort of thesis almost research online to work out what was going on with me, because I kept fronting up to the GP, and, you know, we had talks of chemical ablations for heavy period, you know, all the skirting round, never actually educating me. So when I finally sorted it out myself, I wrote this article, Perimenopause, Buckle Up Girls. And anyway, SBS got a hold of it and invited me to come along to the show. And I guess their interest in me at the time is that I had been quite athletic at that point of time in my life when perimenopause hit, and how it really pulled the rug from under me pursuing some of the more athletic pursuits that I was getting into. And it was surreal. It was, I just said, yeah, I'll do it. But of course, perimenopause for me also has brought and unleashed a whole level of anxiety that I even talking to you today, Sandy, I can feel my voice starting to, and I try to push through it and I rationalise it, but it happens, and it has been at times overwhelming. But I thought I need to be that nervous, you know, fuzzy-headed woman and go on this show. I need to show women out there that menopause does not start when your last period happened a year ago. It is all these years before that things are going to really, you know, mix up your life. And look, going on there, Janice Peterson is adorable. Oh my God, she's so beautiful and so lovely. You know, meeting Ginny Mansberg, you know, I'd followed her for a while. She is just amazing. Dr. Talat Uppal was a beautiful woman who runs a gynecological centre, and I didn't realise until afterwards she's also does a lot of work on the side for SBS, translating for her, you know, her native and first language, and I can't quite remember what it is. See, that's my brain again. And
okay.
And Talat's since become a friend, and we got involved with another campaign called Break the Taboo. Of course, Kate and Kim from the Hot Flush. I actually was a bit of a Hot Flush fangirl at the time, and I'd actually heard them talking on their podcast prior to the show that something big was happening, and I thought, for sure they're going to be on it. And I got there and they were there, and I'd sort of frantically thought, I'm going to need sugar, and I filled my bag with little mini Kit Kats. And so the first thing that came out of my mouth when I saw Kate Murphy was, hello, I'm a hot flusher here, have a Kit Kat. And so, you know, there was all this sort of stimuli with these wonderful women. But how wonderful it was, for me, it was a point of vindication, thinking, oh, you know, I'm listening to this, and we all share this experience. And why the hell aren't we screaming it from the hilltops, or why haven't our ancestors scream it from the hilltops? I do have a couple of theories on the reasons why it's been taboo, though. So, yeah, I still spend a lot of time thinking about it, I must say.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often think, you know, there's this whole thing shrouded around, you know, secret women's business, if you like, and that. But certain things, I think, especially in more Anglo communities, were never talked about, just brushed under the carpet. And I was saying to you earlier, my mum was a hippie flower power child, and she talked about everything. So nothing was off the table. She talked about, you know, sex, and she talked about, you know, sexuality and periods and all of these things, which, you know, as a teenager I was freaking out about. going, oh, stop embarrassing me, Mum. I know all about it. Don't talk about it. Yeah. But the one thing she never talked about, interestingly enough, was menopause.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether she was just really lucky and kind of breezed through it, but I kind of feel like that's an anomaly, and I don't think that would be true. I just think maybe for a lot of women it was very much, well, there's nothing that can be done for it, suck it up and get on with it. But I do think what you said is very true about the anxiety, and I'm a person who had never been an anxious person, never really suffered with anxiety. And going through this perimenopausal journey, that I have actually really felt that myself. And in talking to a number of friends, it's so common.
And, you know, I know that they used to talk about women getting hysterical or, you know, getting ratty, you know, that ratty midlife thing. And I think, well, any flip and wonder, you know, because I found, especially with brain fog, I just really fought against the fact that I was forgetting certain things. And for ladies listening out there, I'm actually feeling like I'm on the upward trajectory now. So this is good for me to talk about it now, because I used to absolutely bite my husband or the kids' heads off if they sort of pointed out that I'd forgotten something or overlooked something. And I was going to that very defensive place of fighting really hard against what my body was just, you know, having to go through, I suppose. And but, you know, on that sort of topic of our mothers and our grandmothers, you know, 200 years ago, the age expectancy was sort of 40. And although that was pretty extreme and there were a lot of people that lived to older age, that's the average age expectancy. Now it's sort of like 70s, 80s. And so, you know, that's a big difference. And so the amount of women that would have made it beyond their 40s as a proportion of population would have been very small. So there just weren't that percentage of women in the population back 200 years ago that were going through this. And God knows women weren't, you know, considered in any way, shape or form back then anyway. So, you know, let alone the whole sexism side of things. And then, you know, back in the early, when my grandmother was young, it would have been called deficiency disorder. They didn't even call it menopause. They really didn't have the language for it. And then the International Menopause Society, I don't think was even put together until like the 70s. And so, you know, when it started to become something that they needed to look at. So, you know, our grandmothers certainly would have just had to, you know, buckle down and get on with it. And our mothers, you know, they're probably more than the liberated time of the 60s and 70s. But, you know, we've had to thaw out. And I think it's our generation that needs to put our foot down and say no more, you know. I don't want my daughters to ever front up to a GP and have him or her scratch their heads because they're presenting with symptoms that I know when I look up online perfectly align with what I now know is the word perimenopause. You know, it's a disgrace, and it's something we can easily correct.
Absolutely. And I think it's really one of those things that, and I was having a conversation with someone about this actually just the other day, I do think it's something that women don't tend to start talking about until they're going through it. But you're right. There is a surge now, a beautiful tidal wave of women prepared to talk about what they're going through, talking about their lived experiences. And you know, as you say, there's so many commonalities for all women going through perimenopause and then menopause. But it does present itself differently for different women at different times. And I think that's something really interesting as well. So there's this whole long list, I guess, of things that women might be experiencing or could be suffering with and they're going through. And as you say, honestly, if you look at Mr. Google, within 5 minutes, I think most women who would be looking at this, if you said, look up menopause, and they'd look at the symptoms and go, oh, good grief. And they've ticked off many of them. I think one of the things that I always say as well, and it's really important, is, you know, I've got a really good GP. And when I went to her and said, I'm pretty sure I'm going through perimenopause, this is what's happening to me, she straight away said, yep, that sounds exactly right. Let's run some bloods and, let's have a chat about what we can do. When I went back to her and said, I've got friends who started HRT and I've tried all of these herbal things and I've tried the naturopath, nothing's working for me. She said, all right, let's talk about your options, and ran through a whole list of things and the side effects and the things that can happen, which was wonderful. But that's not everybody's experience. And so my big thing has always been to say, if you go to a doctor and they dismiss you or they're uncertain, find yourself another GP until you find one that really listens. And there is I don't know elsewhere, but I do know in Melbourne there is a menopause centre that women can call, make an appointment and go to, and I'm sure that is true around Australia as well. Because getting the right advice and having a GP who listens and actually hears you is really important for women.
There's a great group of doctors here in Canberra who run a menopause telehealth service called WellFem, and they were actually mentioned on SBS Insight because Dr. Kelly Teagle really helped one of the women who were on there, who in her late 30s started to experience a lot of problems, but no one would give her HRT. And so, we're slowly getting there. But still today, doctors will go through and study their 6 years to become a doctor and never do a specific unit on menopause. And so, filter that down to one day sitting in private practice, they just don't know. And if you think about it, when we have children, another, pregnancy, another big hormonal hit in our lives, you might go to your GP and you'll confirm you're pregnant, but then you'll be channeled off to either an obstetrician or a community midwifery centre of clinics that will monitor you. There is this whole doula sort of space for when you're pregnant, but that's what the GPs need. GPs, bless them, they're looking after our, corns on our toes and our, all the other bits and bobs in our bodies that are, kids' runny noses, scarlet fever, whatever. But they, we need, I think society needs to have a community health element to there. And the very first thing they should do is tell us what the hell perimenopause means, just tell us what can happen, because one of my biggest things, Sandy, was catastrophizing everything. Oh, what's happening? I must be dying. And so I just kept fronting up to the GP, and then eventually I thought, calm your farm. This is just the way it is. And so it was through online Facebook groups and things like that, that I then started to calm down, think, 500 other women have experienced this, and I would never, ever not investigate something that really worried me. But once it's ruled out, I can calmly say, all right, I've got this, and deal with it. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. We need to start to normalise generalised conversations about menopause, because so many, most people are going to go through it. You know what I'm saying? So
50% of the population,
Right?
Yeah.
They're going to go through it. And at the end of the day, there's no stopping it. It's a bit like when you get go through puberty.
Yeah.
You can't stop puberty unless you chemically stop it.
No.
And the same thing is going to happen with menopause. There's no cure for it. It's nothing to be cured.
It's not a disease. Yeah. It's not a disease.
Right? It's a biological thing that we all go through.
Yeah.
And you're right. So we should just be talking about it. Hey, Joe, pass the biscuits, and by the way, I'm going through menopause.
Yeah.
And it should really be that open, And I think amongst like-minded women that I know, it generally is. But as you say, it's from a holistic medical point of view that we need to start hearing more about this. One of the things that my gorgeous GP had said to me was, are you aware that some women go through perimenopause for 11, 16, 18 years sometimes before they actually hit menopause? And I was so shocked. I had no idea. I was thinking, I'm in it. This is it. She's like, no, perimenopausal, but this could last for years. But she's very big as well on women shouldn't suffer through it alone either.
No.
And this is why I say it's really important to find medical professionals who can support you. There's some really great people out there as well, non-medical, who are coaches, like perimenopause coaches, which now is starting to emerge, which I think is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the things too is that you touched on it before. We both talked about being anxious and having levels of anxiety, that one of the symptoms of menopause can actually be depression. And I think for women, what happens when we feel flat, when we feel down, we're so used to juggling so many things that we just push through. Part of the problem with that generalized thing is that you really need to make sure when someone diagnoses, oh, well, you've got depression, but why do you have depression? Do you get what I mean? And so I think sometimes the menopause side of that is overlooked again.
Yeah.
When they say, well, let's just deal with this one thing. But you go, in actual fact, it's a major thing going on that's caused it in the first place.
Yeah. And when you think about it, we have hormone receptors all over our bodies, our brains, our livers, everywhere we've got hormone receptors. And so when your hormones start to play up, that's why your joints are achy and your brain's fuzzy. And, we all, I was brought up thinking that my periods would just slow down until they stopped. That I could want to rip off my jumper every so often because I might get a bit hot, but that was it. I had no idea of the path it would take. And I would say now I'm 6 years along. I'm still in perimenopause officially. Next March, fingers crossed. I'm hanging in there. That'll be because really the term, I actually looked up a couple of government health websites federally and for the different states. And honestly, very few of them mention the word perimenopause. And if we think about it, menopause is just a day and then you're postmenopausal. And so, menopause represents one day, a calendar day, which is 12 months since your last period. And that's it. Perimenopause, however, as you say, the literature says 5 to 10 years, but yeah, women can go through it, into a second decade of things that are happening with their body that can be associated with their depleting hormones. And so why I didn't know the word perimenopause and all that, I'd say I'm a conspiracy theorist now. Someone's hiding that information away, ACA somewhere. Yeah, definitely.
Bastards. That's true. But the other thing that you just said, which is true as well, is that you do think, oh, I'm just going to have these periods, I'll slow down, then they just stop. But in actual fact, nobody tells you that a lot of women go through this like almost hemorrhaging of blood, right? So I went from having very light periods, so all of a sudden I thought, what is wrong with me? I felt like I was dying. I was, like a lot of flooding, a lot of like heavy periods, all of the things were happening. Going to doctors and saying, what is wrong with me? Getting a Mirena, having like abulation, all the things that happen in between. And, finally something said, you are. You're right in the middle of perimenopause. You're like in it. You're in the beginning of perimenopause and this could last forever. And me saying, well, I can't live my life like this. So how we, but once they realise what is going on and you can confirm it, then you can start to actually, treat the other things. Yeah. But no one tells you that either.
No. You sort of feel in some ways gaslighted. And that's how I was feeling when I was going to the GP. And that was very disappointing because that doesn't help when your head's screwing around with you. And I think one of the reasons why women get to this stage and withdraw, I don't think it's the physical symptoms. My girlfriends and I were talking about our periods being heavy or not heavy, since we first got them. We're that generation who opened up about menstruation. That's not an issue. Blow by blow accounts of each other's childbirth, all that stuff. But it's when our heads are affected that I think we withdraw and think, no, I can't perhaps let people in on this because I'm going mad. But you're not going mad. You're not.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, you're really not going mad, but it does feel like you are, and that can be so high, it just gets exacerbated if you feel like I'm the only one going through this. And while I'm really lucky that I've got lots of girlfriends, and I meet brilliant women like yourself all the time, where I can talk about it quite openly and honestly. There are a lot of women out in the community who don't have people they can chat to openly and honestly about it. And, you know, and we get that kind of feedback through Wb40 or through this podcast. We get, you know, private messages of people saying, I thought I was alone. I didn't even realise all of these things were part of menopause or were part of this, you know. And I will always say definitely join online groups if you find them for menopause. There's so much support out there from other women. But definitely, you know, if you're really genuinely suffering, and a lot of us do, that it's okay to reach out for more additional support, whether that's counselling or a menopause coach or finding a new doctor or whatever. I think those things are really important, to have that support network. Yeah, absolutely. I think too, as you say, keep looking for a doctor until you find the right one. I would say likewise for online help groups. You know, you really need to find your tribe, and some of them, you know, may not suit you. And I've had that experience and thought, right, I've just sort of might back away from this group. You have to be aware, a lot of midlife women going through a lot of crazy stuff. Sometimes those groups can more overwhelm you than help you. So choose your tribe. Agree. That's good advice. And I agree. I recently was chatting to Susan Jarvis on this podcast, and she runs an online business called the Sexy Boudoir, and they sell sexual devices or whatever for people over the age of 50 and for people living with disability. And we were having this wonderful conversation about menopause and sexuality, because that's another thing that nobody really sits you down and talks to you about, how everything in your body can start to change. But one of the impacts that has on women, I think, is, as you say, mentally. You know, for a lot of women, we start to feel less attractive, less sexy. We don't have sexual drive like we used to have. And we had a really interesting conversation about that, you know, and about vaginal dryness and about all the things that can happen that we don't openly talk about. And it really makes me consciously aware that I talk to my daughter about those things as well. Because one day they're going to get there and go, what is wrong with me? Well, nothing's wrong with you. But that's, you know, there's so much involved with going through perimenopause and menopause. And that's another one of them, is to take away our sexual identity. And because no one talks about it, then how do you fix it? And so, I think Susan was fabulous about talking about, you know, your sex life beyond. And in the middle of it, which is really important as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I got involved with a campaign called Break the Taboo by a commercial company. I'll disclose that. And it was a German pharmaceutical company called Dr. Wolf, and they have a product called Vagisan, which is a non-hormonal moisturising and sort of lubricating set of products for women, but specifically designed for women in their midlife. Before I got involved with that campaign, I really hadn't heard about vaginal dryness at all, and hadn't experienced it myself at that point, you know, still to come, I'm sure. And the women that came forward and spoke, and it was eye-popping for me. And I guess it's also one of those things that, you know, going to the chemist, you know, when your kids had hair lice, you'd go 3 suburbs away and wear dark glasses and a scarf, you know, or the worming tablets or whatever. And, you know, I started to shudder thinking, oh, would I ever go to the chemist and buy something like that? But now I think, hell yeah, you know, bring it on.
That's right. Bring it on.
Yeah.
And that's right. But I was chatting with, there's a wonderful woman by the name of Sandy Davies as well, who lives in far north Queensland, originally from the US, but I think she's lived here for a very long time, and she's fab. She actually went through this and experienced all of these issues going on, and went to the chemist, and basically the chemist said, well, you know, here you go, here's some lube or whatever. Anyway, she had a terrible this is awful, but she had a horrendous reaction to this product that she had used, which then made things even 10 times worse for her. But she was so encouraged that she went and actually developed a product herself, and it's called Happy Pores. It's all natural, base with coconut, whatever. It's got a coconut base and it's all natural, but I love that it's Aussie as well.
Yeah,
like
fantastic.
Right?
Yeah.
And so her developing this product, though, and helping all these women, like she sells it all over now.
Yeah.
But what she said was what she didn't understand either was that her product is being used by women going through chemo.
Yeah, wow.
Something I didn't realise is that the side effect of chemotherapy, regardless of your age, can cause vaginal dryness. And can cause irritation, vaginal dryness, irritation constantly. And that a lot of younger women actually suffer with vaginal dryness around the time of their period. And so she discovered that while she had developed this product largely, I guess, for herself, going through menopause, what she discovered was how much those products can help. But in having that conversation and being so open about menopause is how she discovered this whole new community of women going, I need that product and I'm not even going through menopause. And I think this is the kick-on effect of us being open and honest about our lived experiences and what we're going through, right?
Yeah. And look, if you can't talk about your vagina, ladies, call it your Mrs. Slocum. And I'll tell you why, because when I was heavily into my cycling days, I used to cycle with a lovely friend who was an Olympian, no less, had been at the Olympics. And and she would tell me stories about all the girls going out on their bikes. Now, anyone that rides a bike, and certainly for the length and times that I was on it, your bike seat's not your friend. And, there'd be a lot of soreness and dryness. And so they had code. Their code was, how's your Mrs. Slocum? And, of course, anyone that remembers back to the old, what was it called? God, I've forgotten now. Are You Being Served? Do you remember?
Are You Being Served?
Mrs. Slocum used to go on about ma posse. And so, therefore, you can just talk code and tell your girlfriends all about your Mrs. Slocum, and then no one around you will know.
I love it. I know really early on, I don't know if you know this, Jo, but like the Good Girl Confessional started out as a blog back in 2013. And I used to write about sex and dating and my experiences of doing that after 40 when I was suddenly single and divorced. And yes, but I used to write articles like "Love Me, Love My Vagina," and I just would write them and not really think about it. And I got banned from Facebook no less than 5 times. I think it was crazy for sharing this stuff. And it never occurred to me that I should have just had a code word, but I just kept putting it up, saying vagina.
But it doesn't roll off. I wasn't a prude when I was younger, but I became a prude over my marriage years, I think. And so it's really only been recently I can vagina.
I love that. I love, as I said, when I was talking to Susan Jarvis, when she brings out this little model, it's like a 3D model of a clitoris and what it actually looks like. And she just so this is the clitoris. And I said, Jesus, it's not that size, is it? Because it wasn't butchers, it's not to scale. I thought, I better. I was like, wait, I don't think so. Yeah. Hilarious. But you're right. It is that kind of thing where I think when we're younger, I think women in their, 20s and 30s, we're a lot kind of, I don't want to say the word prudish, but I guess we're more concerned about what others think and what society thinks. And I think as we get older, we just go,
yeah.
We're not as worried or impacted by that or the sort of conversations. So, yeah, no, I'm quite happy to say vagina.
Yeah, look, this is all a part of my late onset feminism too, I think. And that is that, I think being this age, I have stopped the notion of being a crowd pleaser. I think hormones make you that way, and now that they've changed, I don't feel so much that I want to be that crowd pleaser. And I my head is starting to come out of that fog and realise who I'm going to be this second half of my life. And it's really the liberating side of this. So, being able to say those things, because it has been a real shift in thinking to refer to myself as a feminist. And would you like me to tell you how that came about? Because it's
please.
Yeah, okay. So, Sandy, I wrote an article a year ago called We Need to Talk About Harvey Weinstein, and I found that article quite quite difficult to write, I guess. It was actually 3 years after he'd been, allegedly, accused of allegations of sexual abuse, and the whole Me Too movement was born 3 years sort of earlier. But two things sparked me to write that article last year. First, he popped back up in the news because he'd been convicted and in jail on the first round of charges, but 6 new charges were being laid against him in LA. And secondly, I really felt I had to fess up about my shameful admission that when I'd first heard of Harvey and his sex crimes 3 years earlier, I thought casting couch. And to be clear, that is not what I think now, but it did just plop into my head. That's what I thought. And it really consumed me. And I wondered, I guess, over those years, how did these women not, get in this situation with him? You don't say those things now. I understand why. And look, in the 80s, I guess I had to navigate that minefield of being a young woman in the workplace. So I felt like I had something to draw upon, and, men and their sexist behaviours was absolutely rife. And the epiphany came when I realised that I had been all those years the unwitting accessory to the generation of men that, use their power to enact their misogyny. And I was probably just lucky that I didn't get a Weinstein in my path. And so in playing along with their comments all those years ago and laughing off their innuendo, rather than calling them on it, I felt in many ways I had been an accomplice, and I needed to atone for that and set it right. So I wrote this article. And even recently, Sandy, there's this term I've come across called internalized misogyny. And it was fantastic that I learnt this, because there are people out there like we women who, at times in their life have minimised the value of other women and themselves by perpetuating the gender bias. And I don't believe it was a conscious choice of mine. I think it came from, how I was raised and where I was raised and how I just had to navigate things back then. I mean, look back to Kirsten Ferguson, who was grateful she was given the second top role, even though she was the Ducks, that sort of thinking we had back then. And I bet like me, Sandy, our formative years in the late 70s, where pop icons were Sandy from Greece, and what did she do? She felt she had to change from bobby socks to leather pants and makeup and have a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, singing with John Travolta, to get the man. And, these were the images. Women were changing to appease the man, and it was a far cry from the suffragettes. And I even recall back in the 80s, I had an interview for a promotion in my boss's hotel room.
Holy hell.
I know. I can't even believe that now. I was telling my girls about it the other day. I said, can you believe that? They're shaking their heads. And, it didn't go the way that one could imagine. But I remember feeling very, very uncomfortable at the time, and I wouldn't accept that today. And then of course not. Even when I married, I didn't really, blaze a trail of feminism. We had our own business. That business became my husband's career, and it became somewhere I worked part-time while I raised our children. And even though that sort of, quite traditional older marital setup suited us, we worked on the notion that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we respected those roles, but I still didn't think it qualified me to call myself a feminist. But, now I write articles and out myself as being such a bloody internal misogynist and pivoted and now brave enough, because of hearing that idea of being a late onset feminist, to identify as one, because I really hope that women out there who felt like me feel that they can choose a side now. I do fear there's a lot of women that just think, that's the way we always did things. I don't know what the fuss is now. We need to push past those very visceral feelings at times, like saying casting couch, that just sort of regurgitate from the past and face them head on and say, well, no, actually, that's not right. Because let's face it, on many fronts, what used to happen back in the day is not the gold standard. There's been enough royal commissions that have proven that. So, I really hope that by me being quite open and honest in media, no less, as to, I thought that and I said that and, but it's wrong. I hope I help other women, cross that barrier from evil to good.
I want to say that I have read that article, Jo,
okay.
by the way. I find you extraordinarily brilliant and brave, because to step forward and say, I didn't even realise all of these things that I was thinking, that there was any issue with them or whatever. But also to reflect is a really difficult thing, and to stand now in this beautiful power that you have as a late onset feminist, and to be helping other women, I think is incredibly brave, because yet again, it's kind of all these, like, it's a bit like the taboo subject of menopause. If you were not talking about this and openly saying, this is how I felt, and God, how did I feel this way? And I'm so different now in my thinking. Then other people wouldn't be able to reflect perhaps on themselves. But you're right. You know, internalized misogyny is a plague really for women, and we were raised really to believe that. And so through media and through movies and all of the things, where we've been led very largely to believe, well, this generation and generations prior were led to believe that it is a man's world, and that, you know, if a woman steps forward and accuses a man, how very dare she, ruin that man's life and career. But we see it all the time as well. We see it in different ways as well, with things like domestic violence, which is obviously rife, and we see it in the way that media headlines come up. You know, that he was a good bloke, that that they basically protect men, that, you know, she must have pushed him to his limit. This kind of bullshit narrative that goes on is internalized misogyny, because some of those articles are not just written by men, they're written by women. Right? Now, part of that is to toe the party line with mainstream media. You know, some people, you don't always have and we should point that out, you don't always get a choice of how the editor is going to tag your article.
No,
so let's
right.
just say that up front as well.
Yeah.
And, you know, so they do skew things sometimes because it's clickbait. But at the end of the day, you're right, Jo, that it's powerful to reflect. And I'm sure every woman of this generation has to some degree done that. And it continues on with things like, you know, we've got this extraordinary new generation coming up behind us who are so aware and so open to understanding different people and different ideas and different ideologies that, you know, we're now all learning pronouns, and we're all, you know, trying to embrace new ways of thinking, whereas for them, that's just a given. But as you say, you know, we are the generation that needs to change the thinking. Yeah. Right? We have to change that thinking. We have to start to shatter some of those taboos. And one of the taboos, of course, is saying, oh, yeah, I didn't understand any of that, that feminism is not a dirty word, and that feminism is a powerful, brilliant movement that can help everyone move forward. And that you've stood in that. And thank goodness, because now you call yourself a late onset feminist, but also a late onset writer, and you're writing all of these incredible articles.
Yeah. The writing is... I have no idea how that happened, but it was I reckon it was definitely my hormones again that got me into writing. That's for sure.
Well, yay for your hormones, because you're a great writer.
Oh well, thank you. It was a bizarre story as to how I started writing, Sandy. Do you want me to fill you in?
Yes, absolutely. I was trying to segue us into it.
Sorry. I hope you do a lot of editing on this thing.
No, you're fabulous. We don't need to.
Oh, well, look, I'll tell you, the writing was really funny, because I'd been an athlete from my late 30s to my mid 40s. I somehow wangled my way into all of a sudden having had the children, wanting to get fit. But when I got to 48, I took on a 102-kilometre trail run. Bizarre, I know, another lifetime ago. But it was then my periods, perimenopause, heavier, more frequent. And so I was depleting of iron. So I got that particular event done, but then I knew I had to find my next thing, because I knew my body needed to go to ground. Do you know my funny story about... At that time, my periods were so heavy, and I didn't know what perimenopause was then, right? But my periods were so heavy and so frequent that I had to, for the first time in my life, buy those extra long, enormous overnight maxi pads to wear. I hadn't had to use those in my life. Yep. And the particular brand I bought for my amusement, had trivia printed all along the tearaway strip, right? And so I used to read these tearaway strips of these pads. And so I learnt that turtles can breathe out their butts before I ever knew what perimenopause was. That's very telling of my education, which was all in this, modern country of Australia. Anyway, that's another thing I'm on to later. You'll have to ask me what I'm doing next because that's a bit exciting.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm excited, but yes.
But anyway, so things had to change. And around that time, my mum died when I was 47. I was the epitome of the sandwich generation, 3 teenage kids, all the complexities that coming that could be like a multi-episodal story we could go into there alone. And my mum had died, but I had 2 dads. My biological dad, who was a single man, and I was looking after his affairs. He had failing health. And my grieving stepfather, who came to live with us, and then my own grief, and also clueless at the time, but perimenopause. So it was a time full of anxiety for me, and I found that the space I needed to deal with what my head needed to do around all those things was when I was out pounding the pavement and training for that long run. And bizarrely, these fictitious characters would pop into my head and a plot for a novel started to form. And I learnt very quickly how to dictate notes into my phone. And then when I got home from my runs, I'd collate those notes and they just all went on my computer and I just collected them. And then a year after Mum died, my sister died in a car accident. So then we had another big, hit in the ribs. And it just all happened, I think many women will identify all of a sudden you get this 5-year period of your time and everything just comes in on you.
Yeah.
And anyway.
I'm so sorry, though. I'm so
Thank you.
Yeah. Geez.
Yeah. Just blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And so I so determined. I'm just most determined person when I decide I'm going to do something. So I got that trail run done and then I said, right, what next? Because, I guess your body becomes very used to doing something like anything you do and it becomes addictive and you are looking for the next fix. So I thought, well, I've got all these notes that I've collected. I'm going to now set myself 2 new endurance events in my life. And the first goal was to get through menopause without being locked up for insanity or homicide. That was goal number 1. Always a good goal.
So far going great.
Yeah, listening, girls, that should be your first goal. And the second goal was that I was going to write a whole entire book. And I say it deliberately that way, Sandy, because if you Google it, 97% of manuscripts never get finished. And so I was going to finish a book. It was going to be crap, but I was going to finish it. So I started writing this book, but I'd never studied writing and I wasn't even a prolific reader. And can you believe I even went and just picked a book off my shelf, a novel, and thought, well, that looks about the right size. So I looked at how many chapters there were. I looked up online how many words there were. Right, that's going to be the size and length of my book. That'll do me. And then I joined a writer's centre and I did a couple of workshops, and in those workshops that's where I was told it's really good if you ever think you're going to go to a publisher one day to maybe have a portfolio of published works. And I thought, this is the only thing I've ever written. I was taking on an 85,000 word book, but I hadn't written an 800 word anything, and the other hint was write what you know. And at that time, I thought, I bloody well know what perimenopause is now. And that's when I wrote Perimenopause Buckle Up Girls. And, of course, that then, I ended up going totally left field with that, with this menopause awareness space, TV, radio, magazines. But it got accepted by Her Canberra. And I've been a freelance columnist with them for 2 years. And they're just gorgeous. They just go and put anything that I put to them. They're so happy to publish it, and I just get such a thrill every time little old me who, submitted my first article at 52 years of age now calls herself a writer. And I call myself an author too because I finished that damn book. So my book is now a 3%er too. So in fact, I'm going through editing the book with a beautiful lady called Nadine Davidoff. She's a fantastic editor. And she's actually teaching me how to write a book, even though I've already written one. Now I'm learning how to write a book.
That is incredible. It's so exciting. And so the editing process is happening, which is exciting.
Yeah.
And then what is the plan?
Well, the plan then for me is to just see. I'll ask Nadine her opinion on whether I should look at publishing it. But for me, this exercise was about learning now to write it. I'd got out of my system that adrenaline, that finish line. Obviously, having had athletic pursuits, finish lines are important to me. Now I'm a little bit older, I'm a little bit wiser, I can slow it down and learn. And I've learned so much. I mean, just think anyone out there that's written is going to laugh at me. I didn't even understand point of view or show not tell or pacing. You know, I was just clueless. But anyway, I do now, and it's just been so enjoyable. And that's the thing, is I love it. After being a short order chef for my family for 25 years, I now sit down and start writing, and I forget to cook dinner. And I just say, yep, take away, stuff it. I'm not, you know, my family would get scurvy before I even cared these days. It's it's fantastic. So, you know, it's just a lovely, lovely feeling, and I'll do it while I still love it, and I still love it.
And I'm so glad that you do, because you bring, as I said, you bring a lot of wit and humour. And anyone listening to this podcast is going to see how bloody funny you are. I don't know, has anyone ever said that you look like Kitty Flanders?
Yes.
You get that a lot? Because I've always thought it, but now, like, seriously, just sitting here, I'm just watching you speak and I'm laughing so much. You do really look like her.
I think
that's a compliment, because I'm a diehard Kitty fan.
I wonder if anyone's told Kitty Flanagan she looks like Jo Pybus.
If I ever speak to Kitty on the podcast, I'll say, do you know who you look like?
Yeah, it's interesting, because that's, I mean, I'm an absolute piss taker. There's no doubt about it. You know, and I was always a class clown. I describe myself. It's funny when you get older, you look back and you think, oh, now I know the sort of person I was. I couldn't see it when I was in it, but I think I've been an anxiety-ridden extrovert my whole life, and that's how I've kept anxiety at bay, by being the clown, or the outspoken one, or the sometimes bossy one might say. But it's always been a mask for anxiety. And then, of course, you know, once the hormones hit, anxiety just got out of its box, and, you know, it was like herding cats. You weren't going to do anything. You had to learn to ride that bad boy out, because if you try and control it, that's, I think, your worst problem. You know, you have to learn to breathe hard. And, you know, I have read in recent years, this is going to sound very cerebral, and I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about here, but I've been reading about the Stoics, and they were the coolest dudes, Epictetus and all those, you know, Marcus Aurelius, so cool. And because I'm not a religious person, and so this is where I get my I guess guidance for life from. These Stoic dudes, they predated Christianity, and they talk about the trichotomy of control. And it's so good when you hear this, because it just calms your mind, because there are things that you can control, and there are things that you can't control, and then there are things you can partially control. And if it's something you can't control, you got to let it go. And I guess I spent most of my life being the one that can't let it go. But fortunately, yes, as you say, there's a bit of humour there, and I can just, you know, joke my way through it. It's gotten me across a few borders in travels over times. So yeah, it's helpful.
It is, and I love it. So I really get a kick out of reading your articles.
Thank you.
You know, I'm a mad fan now for your work over at Her Canberra, which is fantastic. And yes, I was going to ask you though, so what's next for you, Jo? What's new and exciting going on with you?
Yeah, well, okay. So Jo, the late onset athlete who's had to sort of calm her farm a bit, is now, I'm starting to feel a lot better through my perimenopause journey. And now that my periods have certainly backed off, and I'm on a fast path, hopefully, to and never getting another one again, So my iron's good and my sleep's starting to get a little bit better. So I'm now going to start training really hard because my husband and I have boldly already booked a Dolomite bike tour in Italy for next July.
Oh!
So the late onset athlete, she's finding her inner mongrel and she's making a comeback. So that's good. The late onset writer, well, I'm finishing off this book and I don't know what will become of it. I'm going to really miss my characters. I might actually tear up here because I love them. You know that about a month ago when we were in lockdown here in Canberra, nothing like what you've experienced, Sandy, but I did have a moment of being out and thinking, walking, of course, away from everyone and thinking, I want to call, and in my mind, I said, I want to call Fletcher, as in make a phone call, have a chat to someone, right?
Yeah.
Fletcher is a character in my book. I mean, how mental is that? But it popped in my head. I would love to call Fletcher. Oh, my God, he's a fictitious character. So I'm going to really miss them. But I do have another book and I've been plotting it for a while. So I'm ready to make some new friends and to tell their stories. And I'll also continue with my pieces for Her Canberra. And I've also had a piece published in Broad Agenda, which is that sort of more feminist side, because my writing is taking on perhaps a little bit more political, more feminist nuances there. And, you know, I sort of dipped my toe in it thinking I am going to get my head bitten off here, and I haven't. And so I don't know how I'd go with the trolls. I'm no Ginger Gorman there. She is one tough lady and she is awesome.
She is an extraordinary human being.
She's lovely, Ginger. So, but yes, I'll see how I go. And, you know, it's lovely talking to you here today and talking about that internalized misogyny and, my feelings there. Jo, the late onset feminist, is just going to keep outing myself as an old dog who can learn new tricks. And I'm also really keen to get menopause on the sexual and reproductive health curriculum in schools. So I found out recently, I wasn't aware of this, that the UK have done it, and that as of last year, they now have menopause on their school curriculums. And I've actually been in touch with the lobby group in the UK as well as the federal curriculum body here in Australia. Nobody here has put their hand up and said, you know, we want to do this. So I guess I'm just going to have to put my hand up because I have been bitching and moaning about the fact that, you know, my science teacher at Year 9 at Sale High School never said anything about this. So I really need to put a little bit of effort into that. So I've actually having a phone hookup with probably a Zoom actually these days, isn't it? With the UK lobby group who got it across the line. But they're so busy. She couldn't speak to me through January. So please just give me till next year, ladies. And and I guess it'd be really, really good to see that change. That's easy. We talk about condoms and sexual health and ovaries and periods to, you know, 13, 14-year-old kids. Why can't we also tell them about this stuff? It's crazy. We need to let them know. I just still keep doing all this stuff while I love it, I guess. I'm a bit of a Mary Kondo, you know. If it gives me joy, it gets to stay. And this has really given me joy. So, yeah, keep doing that, Sandy. Like you know, clearly what you do gives you joy. It just comes across in everything you do.
Thank you. Well, I'm certainly very passionate about it, and I'm so grateful, really, that is my passion, because then I get to meet and chat with beautiful, extraordinary humans like your good self. And I love that you're out there on the front line of feminism now, fighting the good fight, and, you know, pushing for menopause to be on the bloody curriculum, which it should be. The UK's really good like that, aren't they? Because they actually even have workplace mandates in place in the UK now for women going through menopause, that you cannot be discriminated against. And I love that. That, you know, that should just be global. You know, it really should be.
They really are. I follow a number of women on LinkedIn who are in that menopause consultancy space for businesses and workplaces. There's so much happening there. It is fantastic.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And I think that's probably, you know, a part of our generation, Sandy, is that certainly my mum or my grandma, they weren't women in workplaces in their 50s. And so, you know, now we have women who are running corporations, who are being prime ministers and, you know,
Absolutely.
premiers and going through this. And yeah, how awesome.
And it's amazing because of that, and because we are seeing women in those huge leadership roles in political spaces, that this stuff starts hitting agendas. It's just so important for the rest of us.
Yeah. And look, you know, we're equal opportunities in this house. We just bought this new U-Butte automatic vacuum cleaner, you know, the little robo ones.
Oh, the robots. Yeah.
But it actually comes back and it empties itself as well and then goes off again. It's all programmed. It's the latest thing. Anyway, it's all operated through my phone and you can actually name them. So I've called it ScoMo.
Love it.
I mean, some might say because it sucks, but I wouldn't go as far as to be so rude. But so every so often my phone comes up and says, ScoMo has completed a job. And I sort of say to myself, yeah, well, there's a first.
There's a first.
So I get to sit with you today and chat, Sandy, while the Prime Minister vacuums my floors.
Oh, my God, how bloody brilliant. I need a ScoMo to come and vacuum mine. I love that. I have absolutely loved chatting with you today.
Oh, you
in
too,
the Confessional. Sandy. You are just an absolute delight and a joy. And I'm really looking forward to future times when we can travel and hopefully get to meet you in real life and have a wine.
That would be lovely. And let's hope that sometime in the distant future or maybe near future, we might have another discussion and another podcast on menopause being on the curriculum in Australian schools.
I can't wait. And honestly, I'm going to be following your journey with that all the way through, and I know we'll keep chatting. And I would love to have you back on to talk about that because it's
great.
Really exciting. And your book, you'll have to keep us all informed.
Yes.
What's happening with that too.
Yeah, and I'll keep trying to call my fictitious characters and seeing if they want to chat on the phone. Crazy.
It just tells me they're well-formed characters.
I do love them. Oh, I mean, my kids are great, but I love my characters in my book.
Oh.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Sandy. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jo. It's been an absolute joy.
Okay. So long then.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by Wb40, Women Beyond 40 Magazine. Available now at wb40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.